What I describe with passive immunity, level 1 and level 2, is we are changing the biochemistry status of the host. We are removing the food source. If the food source required is a plant that has a particular amino acid profile or a particular carbohydrate profile, we can simply change that with nutrition management. And we change the host from a susceptible host to a non-susceptible host.
The Biological Farming Roundtable podcast helps farmers explore innovative, low-input, regenerative and profitable farming systems. The Biological Farming Roundtable is sponsored by Nutrisoil, an award-winning biological liquid fertiliser made from a big worm farm. Nutrisoil's purpose is to empower farmers to produce life-enriching food. My name is Nakala Maddock. I work at Nutrisoil. I envisage a future where farmers are rewarded for producing nutrient-rich foods and consumers have this easily available to them. Welcome to episode 42 and part 2 of a fascinating podcast on achieving disease and insect resistance with John Kempf. If you missed part 1, I suggest going back and listening to how complete photosynthesis and protein synthesis are key steps to passive immunity in plants. Steps that can be achieved no matter the condition of the soil you are farming in. In this episode, we continue our conversation with John, whose mission is to have regenerative agriculture become mainstream globally by 2040 and unlock the final 2 steps in achieving complete resistance to disease and insects. This is my conversation with John. Moving on to the active immunity. So you've called the stage 1 and 2 passive immunity, which is based on chemistry, and you've just highlighted that you actually don't need biology as such for that stage. Now we're moving on to the biology stage, so it's based on vigorous biology. Stage 3 is where we move from where the nutrients are absorbed in the form of microbial metabolites, resulting in less energy for the plant for cellular conversion, and this extra energy is stored as lipids. Could you explain cellular conversion and what is a lipid and how that's beneficial to plant health?
Yeah. So before we go there, let me just comment on the comment that you made about level 1 and level 2 being passive immunity. What is passive immunity? Passive immunity is essentially, the way that I would describe it is that you've changed what was considered a susceptible host. You've removed the food source. So in terms of disease susceptibility, we commonly think about and talk about disease susceptibility in terms of the disease triangle. There are 3 essential components in order to have disease susceptibility. You have to have the appropriate environment, you have to have the potential pathogen, the presence of the pathogen, and a susceptible host. And historically, the assumption has been that if you simply have the presence of a plant that is susceptible to a certain disease, that plant is automatically susceptible. So just if you have, I'm making it up here, if you have an onion crop or a wheat crop or a cotton crop, if you have the presence of the plant, then its default status is that it is inherently susceptible to whatever disease comes along. But we all know from real life experience that this isn't the case. Diseases are not indiscriminate. They all show up at certain locations first. They make their entry into a field in weak spots or in weak locations. And this is a reflection of, so what I describe with passive immunity, level 1 and level 2, is we are changing the biochemistry status of the host. We are removing the food source. If the food source required is a plant that has a particular amino acid profile or a particular carbohydrate profile, we can simply change that with nutrition management. And we change the host from a susceptible host to a non-susceptible host. Now, it's entirely possible for that non-susceptible host to shift back and to again become a susceptible host as a result of some type of stress weather stress or fertilizer over application. So it's not to say that once you change the biochemistry profile and you remove the susceptibility, that it can't go back to being susceptible again. But this is what I'm thinking about when I describe passive immunity. So these next two stages are different in that um, the plant shifts from passive immunity to active immunity, and at these stages, they are they are producing compounds in their immune system pathways. They're producing compounds that are designed to protect themselves as plant protectants. They're designed to kill. So that gets into level four a little bit. But I want to come back to answer your question specifically. Um, what is needed to get to level three? So, what happens at level three is plants have a surplus of energy, and they store this surplus energy in the form of fats, exactly the same way that livestock do or that people do. When we have surplus energy, we store the surplus as fat. Plants do exactly the same thing. And when you have this surplus of energy, at this stage, I spoke a bit about how at stage one, when you have a lot of, when you elevate photosynthesis, plant behavior begins to change. Plants begin expressing themselves differently. That occurs even more dramatically at level three. When you get to level three, there can be dramatic changes in drought stress and drought resilient. Plants really begin behaving differently. And this is again, there's enough here to talk about that this could be a 4 hour conversation. But um, the question is, how do you get there? How do you get to level three? And I'll try to keep this a very brief and abbreviated explanation. But the short version is that I used to think, if even a year ago, 2 years ago, I used to think that the majority of the lipids, the fats and oils that these plants are generating, were self generated inside the plant as a result of just having abundant photosynthesis and the surplus of sugars being converted to fats. And it's true that some of that happens, but my understanding has shifted over the last year, and I'm now coming to the conclusion, um, or to the idea, that the majority of the lipids are not generated inside the plant. Instead, they are generated by soil biology. So, um, Dr. James White's work on the rhizophagy cycle has become quite popular, justifiably, over the last couple of years because it's establishes the foundation for a complete revolution in agronomy. And my understanding today is that the plant produces a lot of sugars. Those sugars are sent out through the root system as root exudates. They stimulate soil biology, particularly bacterial populations, as well as others. And these bacteria, bacterial endophytes, fungal endophytes, and microalgae um, that are in the rhizosphere generate a lot of lipids, a lot of fats. They produce them, they synthesize them from sugars, they incorporate them into their own cells, and they will then move into the plant and move throughout the plant and deliver fats to the plant. And this can occur in large concentrations. So I'm of the persuasion that we need to completely revisit and rethink about what the Bible talks about, where it talks about the fat of the land. The fat of the land is not a metaphor, it is real, and it is how the plants. So when a bacterial cell, there's so much context and background that I could describe here about the rhizophagy cycle, but I've talked about it quite a bit online. There's lots of James White's work and my work that people can go listen to. But my understanding of what happens in the rhizophagy cycle inside the plant has shifted over the last year as a result of the research work that Harriet Mella has done and that others have done. And um, the I used to believe that the biology was that a bacterial cell is picked up in the root system, migrates through the plant. When it reaches a plant cell and the plant cell chooses to absorb it based on its nutrient load, that bacterial cell is absorbed through the process called endocytosis into the plant cell and is entirely utilized. It's entirely taken apart. According to Harriet's, some of the hypotheses that she has developed, this is not the case, but that these microbes are actually releasing a lipid raft that is loaded with nutrients, and then they exit back through the cell membrane through the exocytosis process and travel back down into the soil environment for another load of nutrients and then take them back up in the plant. So we should be thinking about these endophytes, bacterial, fungal, and microalgae endophytes, but particularly the bacterial ones. We should be thinking about these endophytes as nutrient shuttles. They are engines that are vectoring and transporting nutrients from the soil up into plant cells. And every time they deliver a load, they're not just delivering a load of minerals, they're also delivering fats, they're also delivering oils, and that this can be a source, a tremendous energy source for the plant. But in reality, it's not an energy gain to the plant because the plant first has to contribute that energy as sugar to soil biology. So this is again where this is why photosynthesis is at the bottom of the pyramid. Once you have good photosynthesis, you have more sugar production, more sugar going out through the roots as root exudates, and then that provides the fuel for biology to produce a lot of fats and feed them back to plants. And this is why what happens at level 3, plants have this surplus of fats, more than they need to form their own cell membranes. And this is where we see a glossy, waxy sheen expressed on the leaf surface. And all of a sudden, plants become very drought resilient. There is much smaller water requirements. They become much more heat resilient. I have some hypotheses around why this exists, but uh, waxes have some very interesting biophysical properties. They are an electret, which is a very unusual characteristic. They can hold rather than compartmentalizing and separating charges. They can actually hold charges together. So a positive can be right beside a negative charge, for example. Anyway, I don't need to get into all of that. But from a temperature regulation perspective, waxes have some interesting properties. One is they are very reflective while simultaneously being very conductive. It's a fascinating characteristic. So that means by being very reflective, let's say you're in a high temperature environment, they can reflect heat and reflect sunlight very well. And also um, by being very conductive, when the plant releases water to cool off, they can cool very efficiently. So all of a sudden, uh, you're able to have much lower leaf temperature in a high air temperature environment because you have more waxes on the leaf surface. So this is many people have described the phenomena of how they start working with diversity of species of microbial of cover crops, and soil biology starts improving, and all of a sudden their crops become much more drought resilient and much more stress resilient. And this is one of the mechanisms. There's other mechanisms as well, but this is one of the mechanisms why is because when you have these vigorous biological populations delivering fats to the plant leaf architecture shifts. Uh, you know, all of our research, all of our study of evapotranspiration rates and of how plants absorb nutrients, all of our study of plant physiology has all been done in either a deliberately sterile environment or in an environment that completely ignored biology. As we understand, basically, what I'm describing in a nutshell is that, and I'm giving you only a very few mechanisms. There are dozens of mechanisms that describes how, when a plant is colonized by endophytes, when it's colonized by beneficial bacteria and fungi and algae, it completely changes the behavior of the plant. So we know that our own bodies, there are more human cells. Excuse me, I'm saying this backward. There are more microbial cells than there are human cells in our body by a factor of, I think, like 10x or something like that. And the same concept is also true for plants. Plants also should have more microbial cells than they have plant cells. And when that happens, it completely changes the way plants express themselves. In other words, the symbiont changes the host. Plants begin to express themselves differently, same as is true for us. So anyway, I've uh, I've wandered far and I've talked about a lot of different aspects, but this is what's happening and this is what's going on at level 3. If you want to get to level 3 of plant health, the fundamental requirement is that we have to have very good soil biology. We need to have quorum sensing. We need to have a microbiome that can deliver the majority of the plant's nutrients. And when that happens, then when you have this glossy, waxy sheen on the leaf surface, now the plants become resistant to all of these airborne fungal and bacterial diseases like rusts and mildews and so forth.
It's just amazing, John. Even the fact that bacteria are often not recognized for their absolute worth, I think. But they're like a highway. They create this highway and they're just like tipper trucks delivering minerals and fats and oils to the plant through this rhizophagy process. With the rhizophagy process, you can actually add biology to the leaf of the plant, and the plant takes that whole biology in. What type of ways would you add biology to increase this rhizophagy process?
Um, well, there are different ways. You mentioned foliar applications, which can be very effective. Seed soaking can be very effective. Seed treatments at planting. Generally, we find that the seed treatments, or applications close to the seed at the time of planting, are the least expensive on a per acre basis and the greatest ROI. And um, I think what we've observed is the greatest responses occur. I'm trying to think of how to describe this. There are kind of two layers that can be separated but shouldn't be. Let's say it that way. The one layer is uh, plant family diversity, and this is based on Christine Jones' work and a lot of practical observation and experience as well. But I think Christine really brought this forward and has highlighted it. Different plant families have a diversity of different species, and they actually vector their own microbiome in the seed and on the seed. And when you have a diversity of plant families with their associated diverse microbiomes, that is one pathway of rebuilding soil microbial population diversity. And the ideal would be to maintain that plant diversity for as much of the growing season as possible. But unfortunately, um, a process that in the process of growing annual crops, many growers are still using weed control methods and they have their plants dominated, their fields dominated by a monoculture for large parts of the growing season. And so we can offset some of that by cover crops at the beginning and the end of the growing season. But the question is if we are if a farm is not yet at the stage where they're able to include this diversity of cover crops and different plant families, then how do you compensate for that? And this is where there is this growing and widespread use and adoption of different microbial inoculants and stimulants, compost teas, compost extracts. The list goes on and on. But I think one thing that gets missed, particularly early on, if you already are at a stage where you have a diversity of plant families, then the missed benefits are likely to be smaller. But if you still have a lot of monocrops, if your soil is still monocrop dominant for most of the photosynthesizing days of the year, then you should really look at um, a diversity of inoculants as an analog for a diversity of plant species. And so um, I am a fan. I've seen some very remarkable and exceptional crop responses to using compost tea and compost extract and so forth. However, those types of products do not address mycorrhizal fungi. And if you were at the early stages of a transition, it's important to address mycorrhizal fungi in addition to compost tea and compost extracts. In addition to that, there are this broad group of nitrogen fixing organisms that are the diazotrophs. There's lots of species names underneath that broad family category. Um, but those microorganisms, as I understand it, generally are also not in abundant supply in compost teas and compost extracts. So I'm of the persuasion that if we have not yet incorporated a diversity of plant families and have their microbiomes growing in our soil, and we want to use to replace or to try to mimic some of that effect to the degree that we can with microbial inoculants, we need to look at a diversity of inoculants as well. Compost tea is awesome, but compost tea plus mycorrhizal fungi is better. Compost tea plus mycorrhizal fungi plus diazotrophs is even better still. So you get this synergistic effect, this compounding effect, when you start stacking these different types of organisms together.
What about adding nutrients with these compost extracts and teas and biology? Trace minerals, they mentioned they're like sides, and excess nitrogen can play with biology. What's your recommendation with addressing nutrients and biology together?
Um, it's context dependent, but generally, if you want the biology to be alive when you deliver it, then you have to deliver it in a solution that isn't going to kill it. And so that means low electrical conductivity, which precludes the use of most commercial nitrogen products, phosphorus products, and so forth. Obviously, some trace minerals such as boron and copper behave as biocides. And so there are products that you can add with biology, and it'll have a mutually enhancing effect. But at least here in the North America marketplace, those products are in the minority. And this has actually been one of the things that set us apart as a company when we first started manufacturing products. What is it now? Almost a decade ago. Actually, more than a decade ago, um, where we specifically set out to design products that enhanced biology even when they were in concentrated form. I still remember one of the highlights of the last couple of decades is was visiting a farmer in California, wine grape grower. We met at a restaurant for lunch. Was our first meeting. He arrived at the restaurant, sat down at the table across from me. He leaned forward. He said, "John, your products are alive." He said they have microbes growing in them. I've I take these products in the laboratory, and he was propagating and cultivating the various fungal species and various things that were in our products. These were not things that we were deliberately adding by design, but our products sustained microbial life. And I think this is one of the foundational pieces. If we want to have, um, there is this perceived inherent antagonism between having an on ramp for biology and an off ramp for synthetic fertilizers. And the perception that, not just the perception, but the reality that synthetic fertilizers will suppress and shut down biology, which they absolutely do. But it's possible for us to deliver and to design nutritional products that don't have this negative suppressing effect on soil biology.
Can you share that with us, John? What is
Oh,
it that protects this biology when it's with nutrients?
I have
I think of biofertilizers, so they're full of lactobacillus because that's what ferments the nutrients. They love to live there. How did we get diversity of microbes with nutrients?
I really opened my mouth and inserted my foot there, didn't I? Um, well, the This is why our products have become so popular in the states, and we're looking to come to Australia with our products and with our consulting service. We've had quite a bit of demand, and so we're going to be there in the next here in the near future. But yeah, what can I reveal? There's a lot of intellectual property that's wrapped up in there. There are some things which many people have figured out and which are widely known, and some things that are unique for us as well. So I'm not comfortable giving you a straight answer on that at the moment, Nikhil. I have to think about that one for a little bit. But um, yeah, actually, this is a change of topic. Not ignoring your question, but there's a thought that I want to get out there before I forget. You mentioned Joel Williams' comment about plant root exudates being biostimulants, and he is correct about that. I'm also in the process of changing my mind about, or thinking differently about um, these hormones that we call phytohormones, plant hormones, cytokinins, auxins, etc. What if the majority of those phytohormones are not synthesized by plants, but are instead synthesized by biology and then provided to plants? When I look at what's happening, my understanding at the moment is I think that process might be dominated by biology. So we're calling them phytohormones, but this is again, I think, perhaps just the biology shifting and controlling the plants to try to change the plant's behavior to benefit them. So there's a lot more interesting study that could be done there, but it appears as if though we have biology in the leaves, in the tips, in the shoots, as well as biology in the roots that is synthesizing at least some of these phytohormones. Not necessarily all, but some of them. We have this group of bacteria called PGPRs, plant growth promoting rhizobacteria. We've known about them for 70 years. And in biologically active systems, I'm coming to suspect that a majority of the phytohormones are actually coming from biology and not coming from plants. So anyway, this is a complete divergence from where we were, but I wanted to get that thought out there before I forgot.
Yeah, well, I'm going to move on to phytonutrients, but these phytohormones, they're another piece of the puzzle, aren't they? Before I move on to the stage 4, where I can't believe a plant can actually get any healthier, because we've completed photosynthesis, we've got our proteins complete, we've increased our lipid synthesis, so we've got extra energy and protection from pests and diseases with these waxes and fats. And then we're going to talk about the increased phytonutrient synthesis. Just one more thing before we move on. You talked about monocultures and having to use herbicides. Is there any benefit in adding biostimulants or amino acids with the herbicides to buffer the effect of the biology and make that herbicide work better?
Um, there can be, yes, and the benefits can be significant, but I mean, we're speaking in very broad generalities here. It depends on the amino acid combination and source. It depends on the herbicide. So there's obviously a lot of variables there, and hitting upon the right combination can be kind of magical and greatly reduce the potential negative effects of the herbicide on soil biology and have them still continue to have a positive response on plants on the crop itself. So speaking in very broad generalities here, but generally yes.
Okay. The next stage of phytonutrient synthesis, there's a difference between a phytonutrient and a nutrient. Could you explain that?
Well, phytonutrients, 20 some years ago, the prevailing lexicon, the prevailing language was the use of the term plant secondary metabolites. And we spoke about different groups of plant secondary metabolites, such as phytoalexins and terpenes and sesquiterpenes and bioflavonoids and phenolic compounds. The list of fancy names goes on and on. And then at some point, the prevailing language shifted away from plant secondary metabolites and we started to talk about phytonutrients. And in essence, these phytonutrients are plant synthesized compounds, I think, just watch me in 5 years say that they're synthesized by microbes. But yes, they are, at least in part, plant synthesized compounds that um, the plants develop largely as plant protectors to protect themselves from ultraviolet radiation, from overgrazing by livestock, from disease attack, from insect attack. Um, these are, you would recognize the names of some of these compounds, such as resveratrol in red wine, um, lycopene in tomatoes, anthocyanins in blueberries. Some of these compounds have been fairly exhaustively studied for their effects on the human immune system and improving our own health. And they are the foundation for being able to have a conversation about particularly healthy plants, exceptionally healthy plants, legitimately being called or being considered as food as medicine. And so all plants produce these compounds. In plain English, we could just simply call them essential oils. We know that all plants produce aromatic compounds and in various categories. And there are tens of thousands of these different compounds. In fact, I think we might be approaching the point where soon we can safely say there are hundreds, over 100,000 that have been identified so far. Um, so all plants produce these compounds, but the concentrations of these phytonutrients found within plants can be highly variable. And we are given a wonderful God-given instrument to figure out which fruits and vegetables have the highest levels of phytonutrients, and that is simply our tongue and our nose. Flavor and aroma. These high concentrations of phytonutrients are reflected in fruits and vegetables and plants that have exceptional flavor and aroma. And by the way, this is most obvious for many of us in fruits and vegetables because that's what we mostly consume without a lot of processing. But I recently discovered that there is a wide variation in the flavor of wheat kernels. I had a fascinating conversation with a grower who's growing quite a large number of different small grains, and he is actually selecting small grain varieties to grow, not just based on their other quality characteristics, but also on flavor. And he's reporting very large differences in flavor of wheat grains coming from different wheat genetics. So um, these phytonutrients, these medicinal compounds that plant produce, are associated with flavor and aroma. And the variability, there's limited data on how variable these phytonutrient compounds can be, but the limited data that we do have suggests anywhere from a low of 10x to a high of, in the case of some compounds, as much as a 40x variability. So very wide degrees of variation. And um, the so the historical thought process has been that if you want to produce fruit or to produce plants that have exceptional flavor characteristics, I'll use wine grapes as an example, or if people are growing an essential oil crop like sage and rosemary, for example, it was common to try to produce high concentrations of these compounds inside plants to produce a lot of aroma and a high essential oil conversation or a high essential oil concentration by stressing them either with water deprivation, as in a drought stress, or nutrient deprivation by limiting nitrogen and phosphorus supply. And what would happen in those contexts is you get a plant with much smaller amounts of biomass. The vegetative biomass is much smaller, but the concentration of these phytonutrients is much higher. And the historical perspective was that was as far as the conversation went. If you want to produce high concentrations of these immune compounds, um, then you need to stress the plant. Well, what we've now come to understand, and again, the context here is that most of these crops are photosynthesizing in the neighborhood of 10 to 20% of photosynthetic efficiency. What we've now come to understand is that when you have high photosynthetic efficiency, and support of a vigorous microbiome, you can actually, you do not have to stress the plants. You can actually grow plants that are well supported with nutrition, that are lush, vigorous, large, have large amounts of biomass, and also simultaneously have high concentrations of these medicinal compounds. And because the medicinal compounds are contributed by biology, um, or I should say the foundation for those medicinal compounds is contributed by biology. Plants that have this surplus level of energy at level 3 on the plant health pyramid. And so what is fascinating is that many of these phytonutrients, again, I'm speaking in very broad generalities here, but the plant produces these compounds in its coevolutionary arms race with diseases. Many of these compounds have antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial properties. They're the plant's weapons. They are designed to kill. They're developed to kill. And so when plants have high concentrations of these compounds, this is the foundation of their immune system, where we talk about the systemic acquired resistance pathway, the induced systemic resistance pathway. Um, these compounds in high concentrations can give plants almost complete immunity to many different diseases and also to insect grazing activity, herbivorous insects. So when we have adult insects like grasshoppers and Colorado potato beetles and Marmorita stink bug and Japanese beetle and so forth that are actually feeding on a plant, where the adults are feeding on a plant, at this stage, plants become resistant to those types of insects as well. So there's there's some really remarkable things that happen with flavor and quality characteristics. Once you experience fruit that is at this level of plant health, you never want to experience commodity production grown fruit again. It is a completely different experience.
That's so interesting, John, because microbes actually create, like they produce these antimicrobials and antibacterials as well. But what you're saying, when we get to this stage, the plants can actually create them. So you've got this abundance of protection.
Yeah. And so and the other aspect is that it's my understanding that potential pathogens are unlikely to ever become resistant to these immune mechanisms. We'll take one better studied example that I'm familiar with. So we now have the emergence of multiple strains of antibiotic resistant Staph aureus in hospital environments. We have MRSA, VRSA, PERSA, as we call them, Staph aureus that is resistant to 3 different types of antibiotics, in some cases now even as many as 5 different types of antibiotics, which means we no longer have any antibiotics that control some strains of Staph aureus. So they started researching the effects of cinnamon essential oil. This is half a dozen years ago that I read this paper. I'm assuming the research has continued to be updated, but they have documented that cinnamon oil has 300 different, unique modes of action in killing and shutting down Staph aureus. Do you think a staph infection is ever going to become resistant to cinnamon oil? To 300 different modes of action simultaneously? Never. This is this is the benefit. This is the power and the strength of these and the intelligence of plants in developing these multiple hundreds of different of modes of action and mechanisms against various diseases and pests. You can never hope to match that with a single mode of action insecticide or a single mode of action fungicide.
Wouldn't it be a beautiful world if we could get to that point, John, where we're not using these insecticides and fungicides and we can actually get these plants through building these stages through photosynthesis and protein synthesis and lipid synthesis and phytonutrient synthesis with nutrients and biology, and be able to drop those out of the system. I mean, this is the level we need to grow plants with medicinal properties that help protect, yes, the plants from pests and diseases, but ourselves from pests and diseases. I've just interviewed Dan Kittredge on the absolute importance of reaching this stage to grow plants with vitality and medicinal qualities, and then allow so that, when we eat them, we can achieve this much more abundant and healthy vitality in life. So I love your stages, John. I think they're really simple and you can step through them really easily. And even at the last stage, you'll see of the increased phytonutrient synthesis, you're still mentioning the key to this stage is that if any nutrient imbalance and deficiency quickly is there, it can quickly limit the plant's ability to reach this level. And I assume you're saying that you can achieve that nutrient balance in any way, whether it's through working in an organic farm or using some biofertilizers or some synthetic fertilizer. That's a broad statement, but yeah.
If I could just comment on one of the things you said, just to expand on it for a little bit, the beauty of what I've described with the plant health pyramid and our growing understanding of all the layers of science behind it is that while we're constantly learning and discovering more, the reality is that this is not a theory. This is not a hypothesis anymore. This is something that we have successfully succeeded on delivering on a scale of millions of acres across dozens of different crops. So this actually works practically and affordably in a way that delivers strong economic returns for growers. That's why I'm so excited about all the science behind this.
You mentioned coming to Australia, John, and bringing your business to Australia so that growers can access this knowledge. Could you tell me about your plans for that and when we might expect to see you?
We have no specific concrete plans at the moment. What we do have is we have dozens, actually, I think it's probably safe to say hundreds at this point, of people who have reached out to us over the years and who have invited us to come to Australia and they want to see our products working in Australia. And we have a history of having an abundance of clients and customers who've wanted to work with us here in North America. But we're continuing to grow as a team, and we now have people on our team full time who are dedicated to working with growers internationally, and so we expect to possibly partner with people or to, in some way, develop our own team and our own business in Australia at some point here in the near future. I do not have any we don't have any specific commitments or obligations at this point that I'm prepared to talk about, but we do expect to see that happen here over the course of the next 6 to 12 months.
Well, that's wonderful, John. I'm really excited for Australia that they can actually access all of this information and have some hands-on help on farm. So, John, thank you very much for speaking with me today.
You're very welcome. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've really enjoyed being here. Thank you for all the work that you do in hosting this. And just on that last note, if anyone wants to reach out to our team, the person leading the development efforts on our end is Kish Johnson. So you can certainly connect with him online. And Nakala, thank you for all the work that you're doing. And to all of our listeners, may you all have a blessed growing season. May the rains always come at a timely moment, and may your harvests be wonderful.
Thank you, John.
Please follow the Biological Farming Roundtable podcast. Share it with your friends and networks. I'm Nakala Maddock and I work at Nutrisoil, a liquid biological fertiliser made from a big worm farm whose purpose is to empower farmers to produce life-enriching food.